Hey, KIDiotequeA. Never made a video response to you, even though we've talked oh, several times. And I just watched your latest kind of downer vlog, and uh, yeah, we've all been there. Maybe not exactly in the same ways, but just I thought I'd share a couple thoughts. I mean, I the moral question about using state resources like food stamps and roads and all that, it's really easy to make the case doing all that is wrong and it's akin to theft and whatnot. And I agree, but we all have dirty hands. Nobody's clean when it comes to this. Obviously, you or me or Stefan Molyneux or Murray Rothbard or anybody. And I'm not, I mean, obviously when we were kids we grew up utilizing state resources, and even after we recognized that there was something wrong. I mean, I remember when I first realized that I was a junior in college, and I remember for a few weeks or months I was really felt like I was obligated to leave school immediately, even though I was almost done with a degree, and just, I don't know, live in the woods or something, and I didn't. And does that make me a hypocrite? Maybe a little bit, but um, we can't all become hermits in the woods eating acorns. That would serve no purpose. And so all of us are horribly taxed and regulated by the government. And so to get a little something back um, is morally ambiguous, I think. Now, I'm not saying, okay, let's all become welfare queens, because I think that's a bad idea for other reasons. Just for utilitarian reasons, the government's very dangerous. You want them to have as little power over you as possible. I advise people, I don't say that they shouldn't go on food stamps because it's evil and they're thieves. I say that they shouldn't do it because the government will have power over them. And I've had some success with this. I was working at Burger King for years. Most of my coworkers were definitely lower income, definitely, trailer trash, not the most, they don't care about politics or philosophy, and they're happy to take handouts. But if you start telling them, well, what if the government tells them that your kids have to get vaccines or get a RFID tag or something like that, they do get nervous and they do think about it. Now, did I ever convince any of them to go off the welfare? I don't know. I don't think so. But just that little seed is about all you can hope to plant. Um, I I don't take welfare. I've never taken food stamps. It never really even occurred to me to do that. If I was starving, I mean, would I do it? Probably. I don't think I'm ever going to be in a situation where I'm going to be starving, but yeah, but it would be very dangerous. But I don't think you should beat yourself up on the fact that it's so accepted. You're just going to drive yourself crazy. Now, the other thing is you should definitely look for people who agree with you. And I don't care how liberal Madison is, there's got to be people. And I said in the comment, you should look up Campaign for Liberty, Young Americans for Liberty, and Ron Paul meetup groups. When I moved to Texas, I didn't know anybody. And just to make friends, generally, I was like, well, I should find people I agree with. And so I looked up, I don't even remember which one. I think it was Campaign for Liberty. And sure enough, they met like once a month or something. And I went, and most of these organizations, I think, are more social than activist. They're not always out fighting for Ron Paul or whatever. And even if you're an anarcho-capitalist, and ostensibly Ron Paul is a minarchist, and his politics are minarchistic, that's a high degree of probability that some of them are going to be ANCAPs, or at least very sympathetic libertarians. And when I went to the meeting in Texas, there were probably 15 people there, and I'd say at least 10 of them were ANCAPs, at least 10. And the other ones were on the fence. When I met them up in my hometown, I didn't know I thought I was the only one in my town. And then I heard about Young Americans for Liberty, and I went, and there was maybe one or two ANCAPs, and then 3 or 4 not ANCAPs. And within a couple months, they were all ANCAPs. Now, it's really good to talk to people in person that agree with you on a lot, and it's like you become really fast friends. Those people in Texas never really hung out. We didn't have a lot in common, but just that political thing. I mean, the first time we met, we talked until like 4 a.m. And some of them anyway, and we just It's like we became friends forever almost. Maybe not the best friends, but it's a start. The problem though, and I think you know this, there's a cliche, and it's true, is that libertarianism is definitely a sausage fest. Now, it's not a problem for me. I rather like it that way, uh, but there aren't that many girls in it. I don't. That's a good question as to why. There are some. Uh, if you live in an area with a big enough city, I don't know what the population of Madison. I think it's pretty decent. There's probably a few. And the thing is when it's such a small population, it tends to be a little weird. I mean, so there's a few libertarian girls. I'm the wrong guy to ask about this, but like a few libertarian girls that I've seen, there's a high percentage that are pretty eclectic. Let's just say that. But they are out there, and the most likely place you're going to find them is something like that. The other place you might find them is at like Tea Party things. There'd be more women there, and they are not all neocons. Many of them are. It's definitely a mixed bag. You go to a Ron Paul meetup group, and you're going to get a lot of gold per unit of weight. If you go to a Tea Party thing, you're not going to get a lot of gold per unit of weight, but there's a lot more weight. So I would definitely look up either Campaign for Liberty, Young Americans for Liberty, or Ron Paul meetup group. Start hanging out with them, and then go to like the Tea Party rallies and stuff, and look. Or if you get really desperate, I guess I'm just joking, but only partially. So don't get too upset. You can't change the way other people think that much. You know, I try and try and try, and I've had some success, but mostly people are pretty ambivalent. And I definitely know the feeling. I remember talking with a guy, and he was a liberal, kind of socialist, but he was earnest. He wanted to hear arguments, and we argued for like literally years. I mean, we'd go through a week or two period where we'd exchange a lot of emails, and then a couple months later the same. I had him explicitly tell me, because you're very convincing, your arguments, as far as I can tell, are bulletproof, and I have no refutation. And then he would just shrug and say, but it makes me feel good. Even when we would address the whole makes you feel good argument, you know, how weak that is. I mean, if you're in a situation where logic and reason and evidence is equal, you know, like if we argued about socialism and capitalism, and the best we could do is have an equal case for both, then fine, go with your emotion. But when you obliterate everything that they say, and they can't refute, and usually they won't admit it, he did, but then you're just like, I like universal healthcare. It just makes me feel happy. You know, that's very, very frustrating. And I think we just have to, you know, manage our time and try and pick out the people who are going to listen or not. There's no point harping on somebody if there's no indication that you're getting anywhere. The best you can do is, you know, hope maybe some of the seeds you planted will bear fruit. That's usually how it happens for everybody at some point. You know, even you or me, you know, we didn't always believe this way, and probably at some point somebody said something, and maybe we didn't believe it all the way, maybe we did, and it just kind of germinated eventually, and maybe it didn't germinate. And there's probably lots of ideas you and I have been exposed to that never germinated, probably because they were false. But I wouldn't beat yourself too much up about it. And I definitely try. It feels really good to meet in person. I mean, the internet's great. We can find people, but it's really good to meet someone in person and just you'll talk for hours and hours and hours and hours. And even as an ANCAP, I bet you can find some. There aren't any explicitly ANCAP organizations that I'm aware of that are anywhere near common enough. I mean, there's probably some, but they only have a couple dozen or a couple hundred members or something. But the Ron Paul stuff, you're likely to find out. The Libertarian Party, I don't think is such a good place. Libertarian Party is definitely a mixed bag, and it seems like the kind of people in it are kind of older gentlemen who, you know, they're kind of like politics is kind of like a hobby, and that they know enough not to be Republicans, but they're not going to be that promising usually. Not always, but I would definitely look for the younger groups. It's more your age anyway. So I wouldn't fret too much. You can't carry the world on your shoulders. I think it always feels good to help yourself out. Every time I buy a new piece of gold or get a new paycheck and get a new gun or anything like that. I feel like I'm helping myself a lot, and by helping myself, I am kind of helping other people. You know, the shit hit the fan in 2008. All the libertarians who were buying gold and silver suddenly rose in stature. I know I did. Like, I had been talking about gold and silver big time since 2004, I think. And, you know, a lot of people at the time thought, well, he sounds convincing, and I think he's a smart guy, but it's so different from what I hear on MSNBC and CNBC and all the financial kids who go to business school that I'm really skeptical to believe him. And then I got a lot of phone calls in basically the winter of 2008 from people who were like, how did you know? Like, and I mean, one guy was like, you know, he was at work and he was telling everybody that he had this crazy guy who worked with him at Burger King who predicted the whole thing. And suddenly I wasn't the crazy guy at the Burger King. Suddenly I was a fucking prophet. And all of a sudden the ideology that I had been spouting for all those years suddenly got a lot of cred that it didn't before. Now, did they all become ANCAPs? No, I don't think so. But I had a couple of Republicans who just said, hey, Ron Paul called it. You know, they didn't like Ron Paul because he wasn't a nationalist. But they're like, look, none of the other guys knew what they were talking about. Obviously, I might not like Ron Paul. I might wish that things were different, but he obviously was right. That goes a long way for people who are paying attention, which admittedly is not everybody. It's actually not most people paying attention to politics. Most people are paying attention to like their work and their family. I mean, even the dumbest redneck knows exactly about the very subtle social interaction between his girlfriend and his brother-in-law that he's suspicious of adultery. But yeah, there's a good people don't pay attention to politics because by and large they have no influence over it and it doesn't affect them. Now, things have changed and politics is affecting people very much in the negative, and that is, I think, for sure the spur of an enormous amount of Ron Paul support, this increase in libertarianism. I have met so many new ANCAPs and libertarians these last 2 years. And they're not the kind of people who were ANCAPs and libertarians before. They are people who, you know, they're jocks, they're not that interested at all in politics or philosophy or, you know, but they just see all this downfall and they go and they look at it like, what caused this? And they don't all come up with the right answers, but a decent number do. And, you know, all we can do is help that process along a little bit. You can't convince everybody, you never will. You'll burn yourself out trying, I think. And also, if you try too hard, it gets preachy. You know, people get tired of it. I have a lot of friends who I've brought a long way, but when we go to parties, if they're just a get-together, they don't care. But if we're going to like somebody's birthday party, they're like, you're invited, but no politics, please. And of course, that's perfectly legitimate stipulation to put on me being a guest in someone's house. But there's a deeper kind of it's not always the best thing to do. And I was never that. I don't think I was that bad at it. Maybe I was horrible at it. But yeah, I mean, you have other interests, so do I. So we shouldn't let it be all-consuming. It's hard not for it to define at least a large part of your life. I know it. I mean, it's been keeping me up at night since I was like 11 or 12, and not every night or anything, but just every once in a while. And you're really passionate about it, and when you're passionate about something that most people aren't that interested in, it does seem a little put-offish. But I don't know. Harry Brown said, you know, you're never going to convince anybody with just pure logics, but you can convince people if you convince that they have something in it for them. If you can show somebody how they're being hurt or how they would benefit by, you know, libertarianism, that does spark their interest. And I remember one of the most successful times I did it is I was talking to a friend of mine at lunch, and I just started, you know, I said regulations are bad. He didn't believe me, and I started listing them and how they raised the cost of everything. And he spent the next week noticing this. Everywhere he went, he was like, oh, look, there's a regulation on this and this, and there's a property tax on this, and gas tax on that. And we had lunch a week later. He's like, maybe we should have capitalism do everything. You know, and I didn't have to do all the examples. He did it for himself. So don't sweat it too much, bud.